Welcome back to Silicon Wafers. Russia hurls one of the biggest mixed salvos of the war at Ukraine's power system. Kyiv is hit by emergency blackouts. Ukraine says Russia hit substations that feed nuclear plants, and Moscow pushes a fresh Zaporizhzhia nuclear plot narrative. We'll separate facts from threats, fearmongering from the terrifying reality. Before we jump in, thanks to everyone who supports the channel, especially through Patreon and buy me a coffee. That is especially important at this time as we gear up to plan the last events of the year. And that does involve one or possibly two trips to Ukraine to film on the ground. So any support you can provide is very gratefully received. You literally help to make this happen. Let's get into the strike, one of the largest against Ukraine's energy grid. Overnight into November 8th, Russia launched 45 missiles and 450 drones at Ukrainian targets, damaging energy infrastructure across multiple regions and sparking fires in Kyiv. At least 7 people were killed overall, including in Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia, with widespread outages reported. That's according to The Guardian. Kyiv Independent's headline that Kyiv faces over 12 hours of emergency power cuts after one of the largest attacks on energy infrastructure by Russia. The outlet notes that Ukrenergo triggered emergency schedules as crews battled fires and damage. Here is a direct quotation from Energy Minister Svetlana Hrinchuk. One of the largest direct ballistic missile attacks on energy facilities since the full-scale invasion has occurred. That was reported in the Kyiv Independent. And Zelensky's statement on the consequences. For every Moscow strike on energy infrastructure, there must be a sanctions response targeting all of Russian energy. Well, he was requoted there in The Guardian, November 8th. Kyiv is under emergency power cuts. Kyiv authorities reported district fires from falling debris. DTEC said a thermal plant was seriously damaged. Ukrenergo imposed emergency energy outages, with several Kyiv neighborhoods facing up to 8 to 12 hours without power, depending on grid section and repair processes. Ukraine's grid operator rolled out hourly outage schedules after the strike to stabilize frequency and preserve heating capacity ahead of winter. That was from a Ukrenergo official notices and was summarized by Ukrainskie Nationalne Noviny UNN. Reuters calls this a massive overnight assault that badly hit energy sites in Kyiv, Poltava, and Kharkiv. State generator Centrenergo described it as the worst attack of the war on its array of plants and infrastructure. So what is this about targeting the nuclear backbone, the substations for Rivne and Khmelnytsky? Ukraine's foreign minister Andrei Sydyba said that Russia deliberately targeted energy substations that power the Khmelnytsky and Rivne NPPs, calling it nuclear blackmail. That's in the Kyiv Independent. His words, these were not accidental but well-planned strikes, deliberately endangering nuclear safety in Europe. No nuclear power operating disruptions were reported, but the intent behind these attacks matter. They are intended to stress the grid elements that keep nuclear plants safely powered even in shutdown, so says the Kyiv Independent. The Financial Times also reported Ukraine's accusation that Russia struck substations tied to Rivne and Khmelnytsky during the large-scale attack. Well, let's go into a bit of background. This is Ukrenergo's wartime story and what their quote from this weekend, that power generation was at zero, really means. On March 16th, 2022, Ukraine cut the cord to Russia, the power cord as it were, and synchronized with continental Europe in emergency mode. It was an engineering moonshot project that was pulled off in just weeks, not years. NSA.EU wrote that this project was completed, the emergency synchronization, on March 16th, 2022. By late 2023, Ukrenergo wasn't just hanging on, it had met the technical bar for permanent interconnection and joined NSA as a full member on 1st of January 2024. NSA's statement is worth hearing. Ukrenergo has consistently demonstrated its ability to operate and maintain system stability in challenging circumstances. Here is the resilience by numbers. After the 2022-23 energy terror, Ukrenergo says about 70% of damaged high-voltage facilities were restored by May 2023. CEO Vladimir Kudrytsky said we temporarily lost about 40 to 50% of pre-war capacity. About 43% of our assets were damaged by missiles or drones. That's from Liga.net. Today's pressure valve is vital. Europe has lifted the import cap to 2.1 gigawatts from December the 1st, 2024, letting Ukraine buy more power during crunch hours. And Reuters reported this week that Ukraine can import up to 2,100 megawatts simultaneously and is using 30 to 50% of that at various times. Ukrenergo's Vitaly Zychenko said there is a possibility for import, and it is significant. That's reported in Reuters. So about that quote of generation at zero, that viral line is technically true, but it only applies to one state electricity generator. Reuters quotes Centra Energa, which is 8% of the total national supply, after this weekend's strikes and attacks. Our generation is now zero, they said. Their plants in Kyiv and Kharkiv regions were forced offline amid fires and severe damage. That doesn't mean that Ukraine's entire generation capacity is zero. Nuclear units, private thermal, hydro, and EU imports still cover portions of demand, but it does underscore the hit to thermal peaking capacity that keeps the lights on in winter evenings, says Reuters. Well, this is still dangerous. When thermal power plant outage goes dark, the grid loses flexibility to meet heating peaks, industrial shifts, and the rail and metro traction loads. The IAEA has warned for months that nuclear safety rests on stable off-site power. Off-grid diesel for pumps and district heating nodes is just a stopgap, not a strategy. As a reminder, the IAEA chief said in June there is no way to restart the ZNPP at the present, that is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, so redundancy must come from transmission fixes, mobile generation and imports, not from Zaporizhzhia. The near-term playbook, what happens if there is a cold snap which hits hard? Well, rotating outages stretch household supply and they protect hospitals, water and heat. Industry takes longer curtailments to keep frequencies stable, according to the Kyiv Independent, so this will have a knock-on effect on industrial production and crucial wartime production. EU imports capped at 2.1 gigawatts plug part of that gap, but expect higher utilization of cross-border links with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary and Romania during peak evenings, especially after this attack, says Reuters. Repair sprint on auto transformers and high voltage substations, the exact node Russia tries to smash again this weekend, including substations feeding Rivne and Khelmytsky NPPs, that's in Reuters. Well, what are the war economy implications? Well, firstly, there's heat and housing. Longer evening cuts stress district heating and water pumping. Cities pivot to generators, expensive diesel and other kinds of logistics. That's according to Reuters. There are knock-on effects for business and transport. Electric rail and metro schedules are compromised. Factories shift to daylight operation or they have to work within generation windows. This, of course, trims output and raises costs. Then there is the defense industry itself. Precision machining, energetics, and drone assembly need clean, steady power. Interruptions slow throughput and increase the scrappage rates of drone production. One reason that Russia keeps hitting substations and not just the big power plants. The background to this, Russia previously took out over half of Ukraine's energy generation at various points in 2024 to 25. The target set now aims for hard to replace nodes of the system. That must be Russia's strategy, we assume. Well, these points were all made by the Financial Times. The bottom line, Ukrenergo's wartime record is extraordinary. its ability to sink to Europe, rebuild plants under fire, and keep frequency steady. But the loss of thermal headroom after this strike is a real winter risk. The counter is clear: air defense for transformers, spares on site, and max out imports until the damaged units can be returned online, says Reuters. Well, let's look into this nuclear reality check. These threats around the Zaporizhzhia power station and the facts. Russian outlets and their amplifiers resurfaced an allegation that Ukraine, with NATO, is plotting a nuclear disaster at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant that would hit EU states. Quote, this story is being run by Kyiv Post, amongst others. Well, what the nuclear watchdog says now, the IAEA has consistently reported that the ZNPP-6 reactors are in cold shutdown. The plant needs off-site power to cool fuel and systems. It's vulnerable but stable when power is maintained. Well, repairs and power status. After a month-long outage, external power was restored in late October following local ceasefire zones that let crews work on power lines. That's according to Reuters and World Nuclear News. The on-site risk signaling is high. IAEA staff have heard outgoing artillery fire near the site perimeter of the Zaporizhzhia plant. A reminder that proximity to combat, not a NATO plot, is the main hazard. That's according to an IAEA update. Well, the greatest nuclear risk stems from occupation, shelling, fragile power sources, not from a Western conspiracy. All of this can be laid at Russia's door. We must treat Moscow's narrative as information warfare designed to spook the EU, the US, its leadership, as well as the public. Well, why is Russia hitting the energy grid now? There is, of course, a military logic. Degrade Ukraine's air defense density by forcing it to defend these deep rear nodes of power, drain their repair budgets, and, of course, provoke public frustration. There are economic levers. Repeated strikes raise industrial costs and hardship on households, while Ukrainian deep strikes on Russian refineries aim to reverse this strategy but have a greater effect on Russia's war machine and complicate Russia's own fuel logistics. That's in AP News. And there is political messaging: demonstrate reach, project inevitability, remind everyone of what an aggressive player Russia is right at the moment as Europe decides on the winter support packages for fuel and other support that it is rendering to Ukraine. Ukraine has a response mix to all of this. More interceptors. Kyiv is pushing for Patriot and other SAM top-ups. Zelensky referenced active talks with Washington in this regard, says the Kyiv Independent. There is grid triage. Ukrenergo's rotating schedules prioritize hospital, water heating, but of course, prioritizing industry, manufacturing, and war industries may impose longer curbs on households and the ability to keep them supplied, so says Ukrainske Nationalne Noviny. There is counterpressure. Kiev's long-range drones continue to hit energy nodes in Russia and occupied territories, compelling Moscow to divert air defense and repair crews. That is a Guardian summary of the counterstrikes. Well, let's turn to the human impact and civic resilience. In Kyiv, outages varied by district. Emergency crews doused debris fires. No fatalities reported from these particular attacks. That's in the Kyiv Independent. In Poltava and Kharkiv, cities switched to generators to keep water flowing. That's in the Guardian. And nationwide, planned blackouts and conservation rules kicked in. Authorities warned that schedules may change as the damage is assessed. Well, what should we watch out for next? Well, what's going to be crucial here is the repair tempo, how fast damaged substations and thermal units are brought back online. That's from an Ukrenergo DTEC update. Air defense resupply, any concrete Patriot, Iris-T and NASAM's commitment after this strike are absolutely essential, and we should watch out for them. That's according again to Kyiv Independent. The IAEA board diplomacy. Does Shidiba, the foreign minister, his call to spur a formal board response on attacks affecting nuclear safety margins, will that have any effect? Will it get any response from the World Nuclear Body? Then there is Russian disinformation cycles. Expect repeated ZMPP or Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant scare stories. We must cross-check these against IAEA status notes and, of course, updates on how the power lines are faring, the substations that keep these nuclear plants ticking over. Authoritarians rely on fear and fatigue. Ukraine counters with facts, repairs, and air defense. But Europe must also counter with sanctions and more kit to keep the lights on and the warmth flowing to homes in Ukraine this winter, as well as to maintain the vital military production complex.